Live from San Francisco, it's Rex Broadcasting Wrestling Observer with Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez.
Are you ready? Are you ready?
Let's get it on!
How's it going, everybody? This is Dave Meltzer here with Brian Alvarez. We're going to be here for the next 2 hours talking pro wrestling in a very interesting period in the history of this industry. You can also call that MMA as well. At 1-800-878-PLAY. We're going to be taking phone calls for the whole 2 hours, so you can pretty much call on any topic you wish to talk about. And there is a lot of stuff to talk about. I guess two major stories. The first one is that Congress sent a letter to Vince McMahon on Friday and told him that they wanted all records of his testing, all information on his drug testing, what type of exemptions people have. They're very concerned in the letter with the number of deaths in pro wrestling, and they're questioning very much the policy that's in place and if there are loopholes in that policy. And Brian, what was your reaction when you saw that letter?
Well, when I first saw the letter, I didn't initially know that things were actually being requested. And then when I learned that things were being requested and there was a deadline, I thought, wow, well, things are moving here.
Yeah, well, the deadline's August 24th, so they could do hearings in September.
Yes. Now the thing when I was really thinking about it was, I mean, what really are they going to discover aside from the very obvious loopholes as it regards guys being prescribed steroids for hormone replacement or whatever it might be? I mean, there is a policy,
perhaps, or perhaps guys who have an exemption for injuries.
Injuries, yes. I mean, there is,
and maybe guys who don't even have an exemption that test 8 to 1.
Oh yes, as far as yeah.
You know,
but I mean, when I really look at
they're just looking for all the. They're basically looking for all the testing information. Not just of this test, of the tests, since February of 06, when this current policy went into place, but of all, not the records, but the previous policies, the details of the previous policies. The interesting thing, there's a lot here that's interesting because, you have the different policies at different periods. You've got the cocaine policy from 87 to 1992. Then you've got the real strong steroid policy from 92 to 96 to early 96. And then you've got that 10-year period where there was no testing at all, and you have to kind of explain how, in a business where which is synonymous with steroids, that for 10 years that you did testing, you did strong testing, and then for 10 years you did no testing, and in that 10-year period the deaths piled up like never before. Not necessarily to people under your watch. I mean, there were a couple, but in the industry as a whole, and it wasn't until not the first death, but the whatever the number is of Guerrero that that they reinstituted it, and then there's all these kind of interesting things about that. Really quick, what does that sound?
Are we being tapped?
I don't know, probably. But anyway, so that's the most interesting part of this whole deal is they're looking at a history thing, and historically there's some really there's interesting stuff in there, especially because the articles that they cited, one of those articles was the one where McDivitt stated that testing didn't work in 2004 in USA Today, and that's one of the articles that they're citing information from in their very own letters. So there's, it's going to be a process, and it's going to be, it's going to be one of those historical periods in wrestling coming up, I think.
Yeah.
Actually, we're getting down to the next UFC with Randy Couture and Gabriel Gonzaga, so it's kind of going to be some interesting stuff. Lots of news over the last couple of weeks, including Sean Shirk and Hermes Franca, both testing positive for steroids from their fight on July the 7th. The same fight, the World Lightweight Championship for the UFC, and pending the appeal, depending on what the results of Shirk is appealing it, Franca is not. He's claiming that he is innocent, and so anyway, if he wins his appeal, then he'll continue to fight, and if he loses, he's going to be stripped of the championship and suspended for 1 year. And that's, it's pretty amazing when you think about, the level of the suspensions. I mean, there is a huge deterrent to not, I'm not saying not use steroids, but to not be stupid and use steroids, because for most of these guys, 1 year, 1 year off means that you got to go get a regular job. I mean, they're not. And it can end your career. Hoist Gracie may never fight again. And in wrestling, there are suspensions in WWE for 30 days, although you continue to wrestle. And in TNA, there's just business as usual. Nothing happens. No testing. No nothing. And that's the other interesting part of all this is that Congress probably doesn't even know TNA exists, but when they find out, and they find out there's no testing, I think they're going to get real interested. And they will find out if they're going to investigate this business.
Yeah, this whole thing is very intriguing just to think about. I mean, what could this mean? What is this going to lead to? And what kind of problems will it solve? Because we've talked many times about how this is a bigger issue than just WWE. And you mentioned UFC and TNA and the Indies and everything like that. And if they do, I mean, I see them closing loopholes. I think that's pretty obvious.
There's a good chance that was going to happen anyway.
Sure, but I mean, beyond that, what can happen here? I don't even know.
Well, I mean, the thing that could happen if WWE fights them, which they won't, I don't think.
That would be
I would be 95% sure. I can't be 100% because of Vince. You never know how, Vince may take it as a challenge, but if they fight them on it, what would probably happen is there would be a push to re-regulate wrestling and get these commissions to test wrestlers, which would be a disaster for the independent scene unless there's some sort of loophole for them and, a definition of pro wrestler as being someone who works full-time for a regular company as opposed to a weekend warrior. That's probably a worst-case scenario of what they could do. That would take probably many years to put into place because you have to go on a state-by-state basis to do so. And it's the last thing that WWE wants to have done because they fought for years against this, which is one of the reasons why I think that they're going to be very conciliatory and admit that there's problems and come to a compromise. And I think that's what will happen. But still, even if that does happen, what about the rest of the industry? Because I just don't see them doing an investigation of the industry and actually not being aware that there's an industry far beyond WWE, particularly when this list of deaths come out and they realize that, 2/3 of those deaths are not WWE deaths. So there's a big problem that goes far beyond WWE.
So really, I mean, in the end, if this does result in state-by-state regulation and that sort of thing, it could really come back to bite WWE that they claim that only 5 of these guys died under our watch and the rest of them all worked for other companies or elsewhere in this business. Because that's going to...
That could backfire on them because it may make them say, hey, you're testing...
You're right. Well, let's do something about the whole business.
But we can't... But if we're going to have to regulate this industry, you're going to end up... We can't regulate the industry and exempt you. So you're right. That strong of an argument could work against them.
Yeah, it's
and I'm sure
really
that they will not think. I'm sure that they will not think of that either.
Well,
even if you tell them,
there's a lot of things that they haven't thought about lately. So
yeah,
I would be surprised if they thought this because I think that probably what they would want to do is just say, well, here's everything. You're right. These levels that we allow are too high. We're going to close them. We're going to enforce our policy. Everything's great. Leave us alone. And
I'm sure that will be the what they do. But then you have the question that you have to convince people that that's okay and that that's viable. And you're going to have a lot of testimony from people saying, "How can we trust them?" And they're going to have a history of saying a lot of things. They do have a
poor track record.
What?
They do have a poor track record.
They have a track record regarding being trustworthy, which will not help them in this situation either. So it's going to be an interesting fall season,
say the least.
Yeah.
In regards to drug testing, you were talking about the failed drug tests, and I have been amazed at the stupidity that we've seen. I mean, just the absolute stupidity.
How do so many people fail a test when you know the day you're being tested?
Not just the day you're tested. but how are so many people failing for things that would either be in your system for an extremely long time, which would be stupid to take, or are only in your system for like a day, and you still manage to fail when you know the day you're going to be tested?
Okay, those people are addicts. I mean, the couple of people that like fail for cocaine and stuff, they're addicts.
Okay, well we can.
And they're gonna, and the ones, the ones who failed for that one, that hasn't surprised people, because those people, those are people whose careers are going down in flames for that very reason.
I see. Now with Hermes Franca, though, I mean, if we believe what he's saying.
Yeah, but you can't take him at his word, because the drug he used does not have the application of what he claimed he was using it for. So he was just trying to make a sob story for the fact that he got caught. That's all.
So either he's stupid for getting caught, or he's stupid for not thinking about the consequences of getting caught.
Both.
Either way, he's stupid.
Yeah, no, I mean, he had no, the Hermes Franca, the deal was is that he took a drug so he could get down in weight without losing strength.
Yeah.
Because he probably figured that that strength was going to be a big issue going against Sean Shirk, who's incredibly strong. So, that's what he was doing. As far as Sean Shirk goes, it raises a million questions. Because, Sean Shirk's muscular as hell, and there's always been suspicion of Sean Shirk because of the physique, but that's not necessarily the case. There are people who have good physiques and the guy trains really, really hard, incredibly hard. I've seen Sean Shirk for years, and he's always looked the same. There's never been a big variation. So does that mean, does that mean that he's always been on it, or does that mean he's not on it now, or I don't know what it means. He's a real interesting character here, because he's also challenging the test, and he's also one of those guys who's been absolutely adamant that he has never touched a steroid in his life.
Yeah.
So, this is going to be, the hearing is, the 6th, right?
Yeah, I think so.
It's going to be a real interesting hearing on his part. It's going to be interesting from the California standpoint. California doesn't like to back down. They don't like, Armando Garcia doesn't like to be wrong. Sean Shirk's got a rep that he wants to keep. He's so adamant about never using it. So he's going to have a lawyer. Of course, his lawyer is the same lawyer with Nastula, and that was the one with that great Nastula defense of we're allowed to take steroids in Pride. It didn't fly very well in Nevada. So
well, I hope he's got a better excuse for this case.
Well, I'm guessing they're going to try to say it was he took a supplement which caused positive, but the problem is that you're accountable to to the supplements you take.
Yeah.
So they may lessen the penalty if that was the case. Not make it a 1 year, which is what happened with Nathan Marquardt. I don't know. There's a lot of ways it can go. I want to bring up a couple of deaths this week in professional wrestling. Earlier in the week, Tor Kamada, who was a Hawaiian-born wrestler who did a Japanese sumo wrestler gimmick, wrestled from the early 60s through the 80s, kind of a journeyman heel. He passed away. He had been sick for over a decade. He had heart problems. So was living in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and he was kind of a big-time cult figure in Stampede Wrestling, although he wrestled literally all over the world. And, of course, the other one last night, Karl Gotch, real name Karl Istaz, who was reputed to be one of the toughest men who ever lived, who ever walked this earth. Of course, we will never know because nobody really tested his reputation, but he certainly put a hurting on an awful lot of people during his lifetime in the gyms, and there's all kinds of stories about Karl Gotch. He is, he's a huge historical figure in Japan. He trained, Inoki, Fujinami, he did some training with Kentaro Oki. He trained Maeda, Takada, Funaki. Just pretty much every young guy who came through that New Japan dojo would have trained Benoit, as a matter of fact, among different people. And he taught them all shooting. The original Pancrase, which was the first real, what I would call professional mixed martial arts type of league, where guys were like full-time workers and wrestled each other over and over again. The basis of what they did, a lot of the submission knowledge that they had to start with, was the Karl Gotch shoot wrestling, or catch wrestling, I guess, is what it's also termed, knowledge that Karl learned in Billy Riley's Snake Pit in Wigan, England. Just a huge figure in Japan. I mean, he was known as the god of professional wrestling in Japan, and I guess it doesn't get much bigger than that. To say that in Japan he was on the level of Babe Ruth, maybe only a slight exaggeration at most. I mean, that was a name, and it's a big, big deal in Japan. He was 82 years old. He was not a major superstar in this country because he was not very flexible in what he wanted to do. He didn't like to sell during his matches too much. He had a rep for, in his matches, he didn't mind himself looking good. Other guy, sometimes yes, sometimes no. It was difficult to work with, difficult to control. And some promoters, I mean, he got work as a policeman, which is basically, you brought him into your territory, and people wanted to, would come to your territory, to the matches, fans, I want to be a pro wrestler, and so put him in the gym with Karl, and Karl would give him a lesson. And that was actually more of his role. He was never, although he did hold the world title in Ohio for 2 years before losing it to Luthez. And Luthez-Karl Gotch was a huge rivalry. Both inside and outside the ring. They had a lot of matches. But it was kind of like who's the tougher, and, but very, what could I say? A very bad dude in his day, no question about that. I mean, certainly in the pre-UFC era, where, now guys are well-rounded, real all-around fighters, and Karl was not a striker. He was a submission wrestler. But as far as pure submission wrestling goes, maybe one of the best of all time for all we know. But we'll never know.
Yeah, if you look at what UFC is today, just looking at America and where it came from, and some of the guys from the early UFC like Ken Shamrock, and trace it all back, I mean, you can really say that he was a very influential guy in what we see as MMA today.
Oh,
and even was influential recently. I mean, not even just going back to the beginning, but even today, a lot of guys, influenced by him.
As far as if it was not for Karl Gotch, there would be no UWF, and the UWF was the transition group between pro wrestling and the Pancras, which ended up being shoot pro wrestling. And he was also very influential in the Pancras thing as well. So he changed the business completely in Japan, completely. He was a very key part of that. He was, one of the people who got in Maeda's head to change, wrestling to be more legitimate looking. And in hindsight, whether it's for better or for worse is quite the debate. But it happened.
Well, even going back to Inoki when he did the mixed match, I mean, that was really like the first real major MMA match. I mean, you can go back farther to Nakamura and such, but I mean, that was a huge one.
Karl Gotch was Inoki's trainer for the Ali match.
Yeah,
and cornerman. Unfortunately, the rules didn't allow much of what Karl taught him for Inoki to use, or else history of wrestling would be very different if Inoki would have been able to use submission holds in that match, and Ali wouldn't have been able to get so many rope breaks. I got a feeling. And been able to do more wrestling as opposed to what was banned. Because, if Inoki had gone in there and beaten Ali in that match, which with freestyle rules, most likely he would have done, the history of this business would be different because that guy would have been just... Can you imagine how big he would have been beating Muhammad Ali in 1976 by submission?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And how it would have ushered in... It may have ushered in submission wrestling as a real sport or mixed martial arts, 2 decades earlier, because the greatest in boxing would have been beaten, and the idea that the greatest in boxing wasn't really the toughest guy in the world, which really nobody knew for 20 more years, it would have been established 20 years earlier.
Yeah.
To the general public, because everyone would have known the results. So there's lots to think about there. Is Scott up right now?
Yes, I am.
Scott, how are you doing today? This is Scott Williams, who helps with the Observer as well. And one of the reasons that this would be a good time to get Scott on is that Scott has been for years a crime reporter in Galveston, Texas, and has covered, about the only thing that he and I ever talk about is either professional wrestling or the weird cases that he covers. And believe me, they are some of the weirdest, sickest things ever. So what Chris Benoit did was basically what Scott does as far as his coverage. And I want what are your thoughts as far as media coverage and thoughts of the event as compared to other similar things you may have come across?
Well, most of the double homicides that I've covered have a defendant who's still alive to try to defend themselves in the criminal case. Well, I've had a couple of murder-suicides that I've covered, but nothing that really fits the Benoit mold to a T, but I do think that the amount of time that I've spent talking to medical examiners about autopsy results and crime scenes really kind of informed me that the two-pronged approach of labeling this series of crimes as a roid rage or dismissing steroids altogether, which are the two extremes that a lot of people out in the mass media have taken, neither one of those is the correct way to go. People like Nancy Grace and that other idiot, Glenn Beck, when talking about this, they want to talk about roid rage, which I maintain is partially because the TV people love their alliteration, but it's also because it's a simple explanation, and what TV puts out is a simplified version of what goes on in your world. And I think that there's not room for a nuanced view of steroids are definitely part of the equation or part of a cocktail of disastrous things that led to this, but they're not the whole story, and at the same time, you can't just dismiss them out of hand either.
What's your thoughts as far as the coverage and as far as an industry, wrestling or WWE in specific, how they have kind of addressed it or not addressed it?
You and I are actually kind of on the same page on this. I thought that the first show that she did on it, I thought Nancy Grace's research was just embarrassingly bad and shallow. But by about 2 weeks in, she had the best television presentation of anybody. Her show was explaining it better than any other program was, that they were catching more of the BS than anybody else was. And I really think that she's gotten as close as anyone on the news networks has gotten to really nailing that issue. With WWE has been handling it, I almost think that there are people in PR classes, in communication schools at colleges all around this great land of ours who are probably videotaping everything WWE does so that they can give a seminar on how not to handle a public relations crisis. They're doing everything exactly wrong.
Brian, I want to ask you something since Nancy Grace came up. Are you scheduled on Nancy Grace at any time this week?
It depends on if any big news breaks. If nothing happens tomorrow, I'm probably going to be on. But, I mean, last week, as you're well aware with China, they had the show planned like 3 different times, and each time something devastating in the world, such as Lindsay Lohan getting arrested, came up and sidetracked it.
Yeah, because Mark Merrill emailed me and said that he was scheduled to be on tomorrow.
Yeah, so that could change, but that's the plan.
Yeah, well, it changed 3 times this week. So, Scott,
Of course, I actually got a taste of her show right before that because I was on as the local reporter when we had the case of the guy who microwaved his infant daughter.
Now, so, I remember, actually, and I don't know if it was her show, but I watched a show right after that case happened, and they had the Houston reporter on, and I was, like, getting really mad because it was your story, and he wasn't even telling it well.
Well, that's actually why I went back and agreed to appear on the show when they were doing a follow-up. The first time they did the show, they called and asked me about it, and I kind of said, I feel ethically hinky about going on and putting myself in a position to provide you with my analysis or my opinion on something, because I then have to turn back around and just be the reporter again the next day. But after watching the train wreck that guy was, I mean, I spent more time the next 2 days with people stopping me in various hallways and and at police departments straightening out details that he screwed up because they saw the show than I would have if I just done the show. So the second show that they ended up doing on that case was about 2 days later, and I did go ahead and do that one just to keep that guy from getting on there again and screwing everything up as it for any other reason.
Yeah, kind of like what I wanted to do when I was doing some of
Exactly.
shows.
Yeah, you know how I feel.
That was my motive.
That's the goal.
You know, was just like it was, some of those things were so bad. I just figured, you know, I don't want too many people saying too many things that aren't true, and then not at least having, you know, 18 seconds to try to clear up 9 minutes of dishonesty.
Yeah, because, you know, for a lot of people, if they hear something said on TV by someone who sounds like he knows what he's talking about, they're going to give that statement credibility. And people who really know what they're talking about on the subject and watching go, oh, well, that's not true, and that's not true. But most people are watching these shows because they don't know a lot about these cases, and for whatever morbid fascination there is, people are interested in those cases. And if they hear somebody go on and just talk about a lot of stuff that just isn't true or is just kind of a, pardon the expression, but kind of a half-assed supposition, they're going to walk away from that show thinking that stuff's right. And then, like in my case, if I write a story about the case the next day, I've actually gotten all the details right, but I'm contradicting what the wise man said on TV, and that gets me flooded with questions.
Now, Scott, exactly where does it stand as far as writing a book? Because I know that you're in negotiations for a book on the whole Benoit thing.
Yeah, I am. Mine's not really on the Benoit case as the beginning and end of it, but almost as an entry point to do kind of the crime reporter's take on the wrestling deaths, which, as you know, is something I've been talking about doing for like 4 years. But I am in talks to do that right now. Okay.
I want to get some calls. I want to start with Ed in San Antonio. Ed, what's going on?
Hey guys, Scott, I wanted to ask you. I know your next sign is to do this what you were just talking about for your next book. But other than that, I was wondering. I've always tried to get Dave to do this, but he always said he doesn't have time. Is there any chance you could ever do a Von Erich book or something like that?
I can almost guarantee you that the Von Erichs are going to get more than one mention in any crime reporter's take on the wrestling death book that I do. But as far as the book about the Von Erichs themselves, you know, that idea has actually been floated by some people who know that era and that territory as well as I do. And the general consensus is it happened too long ago. There's just not much of a market for it outside of in the Texas area among people who remember that stuff.
You know,
I did a book on ECW that came out 2 years ago, and we just put the soft cover out. And while I would encourage everybody to buy 5 copies, the truth is it didn't sell that great. And ECW is a lot more recent, with a lot more media coverage, at least on the cable networks, than the Von Erich name has these days. It's kind of an unpleasant reality. The publishers have flooded and glutted the market with wrestling books of every shape and size, and even ones that are good aren't getting the notice that lousy ones would have gotten 10 years ago.
Or the sales, for that matter.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, because, I mean, when you think back at the sales of those books, the first books that came out, those books, some of those books, like the Rock book and the China book, if they were to come out now, nobody would even give them a second look. I mean, not The Rock, as far as, you know, it would get pub because it was The Rock, but he would have to do a whole lot better book. And the China book, that came out now.
I think the China book would have a big following in the masochist market.
Okay, guys, if I could just ask one more question, Dave. Could you tell me exactly
Ed, could you talk a little louder?
Oh, Dave, I just wanted to ask you about what's going on with the lawsuit and Jerry Lawler and him punching somebody. What's the exact?
They got a court date on Wednesday, I think. Sal Corrente, who was the heel manager there, and Jerry Lawler punched him, and that's going to be a real tough one because Lawler is just going to claim it was an accident. You know, stuff happens in wrestling, and sometimes, you know, you connect harder than you mean to. And Corrente is going to claim that he was assaulted. And I mean,
did it happen during a show, or was this like?
It happened. It was actually, they were brawling to the back, and a fan took a swing at Corrente, and then Corrente didn't hit a fan, but Lawler ran out there. Lawler was not even in the match, and Lawler, Lawler's match had, I believe, already taken place, and theoretically, with Lawler, he probably would have, under normal circumstances, left the building. But he came out there and he clocked Karenny with a really good punch, and Karenny left, and he filed charges. And then when they tried to turn it into an angle on television, Karenny was really upset. So that's a real tough one, because there's a pretty darn good chance that of the two people in this one, the honest one is Karente. But how would you prove that? And then plus you're dealing with Jerry Lawler, who Jerry Lawler in court is a pretty difficult adversary. He's never been pinned down for anything he's done, and he's been in court many times.
Yeah,
right.
For a lot worse stuff than that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to remember about this that's different than, say, the criminal case that he had with the statutory allegations of a decade and a half ago is that the burden of proof is a lot different. In a criminal case, it's what they call beyond a reasonable doubt.
This is a criminal case, it's not a civil one.
Right. So if he were pursuing him civilly and was suing him for a personal injury lawsuit or something like that, then the burden of proof would just be a preponderance of the evidence, which is which one of these two people do you believe more, even if it's a 51% to 49% difference. But because it's a criminal case, the burden of proof is a lot heavier on the DAs who are, in effect, representing Karente.
Yeah, because it's just, how can you say, I mean, you're going to have people testify that, Lawler will have people testify that, yeah, I've gotten hit hard, occasionally.
Karente needs to call some guys that'll say, I've worked Lawler many times and he's never touched me.
Right.
No, if people are telling the truth, that's one of the deals with this one, is that the only two instances that I can recall, there might be one other one, but I can only recall two instances of Jerry Lawler ever potatoing anyone, and the other one was Paul Heyman, and I am sure he meant to potato Paul Heyman.
Well, Bret Hart has that potato story too, where Lawler potatoed him, and then Bret gave him the receipt in what I think was their big SummerSlam '93 match.
Well,
he's certainly not Vader when it comes to stiffing people.
But yeah.
But one of the keys to that could also be, though, if the prosecutors are able to effectively get across the structure of booking a wrestling match with the post-match angle and the brawl,
and the fact that Lawler was not involved, was not booked in that.
Exactly.
Yeah, because Lawler was not supposed to be out there. It wasn't as if like they were building up a match and Lawler came out there and it was scripted. I mean, Lawler was out there unscripted, and there's also another.
Right. So if his defense is, this is just part of our worked wrestling thing, if they get the booker, whoever books this stuff, up there to testify truthfully, Lawler wasn't booked to be out there.
Yeah, but Lawler may have been the booker.
Well, then if Lawler gets up there and says, I was booked to be out there, they might have a problem.
I don't know that he is. It's funny because Karente had, a couple of people in the company call him and apologize to him, which, if that comes out on the stand, that's at least something. But then again, will those people under oath testify against Lawler in Memphis? It's just, it's an interesting case that, but yeah, lots going to come out on that in, I believe, Wednesday. Anything else, Ed?
Yeah, I read that they canceled or they had to stop the Six Flags show because of rain, and I was just thinking WrestleMania's in Orlando. Brian Fritz had told me and Brian something about they were thinking about making something over the ring. I was wondering what you had heard about this.
Yeah, they did for sure. As soon as they came up with the idea of doing that outdoor show in Florida where it could rain at any moment, they plan on building a structure. So the ring itself will be safe in the event of rain, and it'll go on. Everyone in the audience is going to get poured on, but the matches should be fine. So yeah.
Well, I was thinking you're going to have 100,000 people there. I mean, they got to be real careful about how they make this, because just because it's clear, it doesn't mean that the rain itself won't stick to it, and you'll have 100,000 people not be able to see anything.
Well, it has to be a pretty bad rainstorm. I mean, the fact is that, football games, go on in the rain and things like that. So it's not like, and people stay. It's not like they all walk out. And WrestleMania is a huge event. So, unless it's just, a hurricane or something like that, I don't see,
Yeah, and it's actually WrestleMania is not taking place during hurricane season.
Yeah,
well, even
be a lot
like
more
the
worried if
Ohio
it was
Valley
SummerSlam.
show, even with the Ohio Valley show, it was raining like crazy, and I mean, people weren't leaving until they canceled the show, basically. So I would be surprised if people spent the money to go to WrestleMania and walked out because it rained.
Yeah, and I mean, Mexico, they do those outdoor shows in the rain all the time, and generally speaking, I mean, sometimes they've had a little less than full houses for TV tapings, for AAA in the rain. But, I see them all the time where you see those TV tapings with the people with their umbrellas and their raincoats and everything like that. But the matches go on and the wrestlers slip all over the ring because they don't have that structure set up to, which probably wouldn't be the worst idea for AAA to have when they run TV in the rain, because these usually make for, like, really lousy shows.
Okay, well, thanks for taking my call, guys.
Okay, very welcome. Okay, Scott, what are your thoughts now as far as, I don't know if you can even really tell, but the work of the prosecutors as compared, in the Benoit case, as compared with what you have seen elsewhere, or, how the basic, everyone in the Atlanta area has handled it, as you can see, based on your reactions?
I think the Sheriff's Department and the DA's office and the medical examiner's office there have all handled it very, very well. That they've kept people abreast with regular updates, which a lot of agencies, even when they know they're dealing with a case that has a lot of notoriety and interest, don't do. I really think that they've acquitted themselves nicely in the way that they've handled it.
Let's go to our next caller, which would be Michael in Minnesota. Michael, what's going on?
Hi, Dave. How are you?
Doing good.
All right. Love your show, by the way, and I love your website. I read it all the time.
Thanks.
I have a question about WWE and their travel schedule.
Mm-hmm.
I know this has been talked to death at this point, but don't you think there needs to be some kind of an off-season for wrestling, just like there is for any other sport? Because these people are on the road 350 days a year.
Well, they're really not on the road 350 days a year. They're really on the road.
About 140, 160.
Yeah, 140 to 160, and then a couple, like Cena's on the road a lot more than that because he does a lot of PR. But, as far as, you don't have to have an off season, like several months off. There are ways that you can structure this where guys can have time off.
Just rotate who's going to be off.
Yeah. Certainly with the house shows, you can do things like, maybe you do your TVs every Monday and Tuesday, but, you give guys, maybe one weekend a month you don't have house shows, or maybe one weekend a month, everyone gets one weekend a month off of house shows and you rotate the crews, because with the exception of Cena, there's no one indispensable guy, that makes a big difference in drawing at the house show. So you can, just rotate guys around, and I think, I kind of expect they'll do that. If guys need more, time off. It's funny because the older wrestlers that have been around for a long time, they consider this schedule like ridiculously easy. But times change and there's different demands, and there's probably going to be schedule changes made both for the talent and also probably lessening of house shows at certain points of the year. Maybe after WrestleMania, or maybe you do a couple weeks on, couple weeks off like they do in Japan. There's a lot of different ideas that have been thrown out there, and they're all being addressed. It probably will change in some form, I think. Okay, do you want to hang on, or do you want to go?
I'll hang on.
We're going to go to Mike back in Minnesota. Mike, what's going on?
Well, what I was saying, Dave, was the reason I was asking that is because if you believe most of what is the mainstream media coverage, they would have you to believe that these people were on the road 300 days a year and were being worked like rabid dogs with no break.
Yeah.
But I also noticed on your website you said something about a book on the whole Chris Benoit case. Is there any possibility that that's going to be made into a movie?
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked at all. There's going to be documentaries come out on that before the end of the year, I'm thinking. But as far as like a made-for-TV movie,
right?
Wouldn't shock me at all. Not, I haven't heard of anyone doing it, but I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Well, I would certainly hope not. God knows the families don't need to rehash the whole thing.
Yeah.
And on a side note, I never liked Nancy Grace anyway, so I don't pay attention to anything she says.
Okay.
Well, she's gotten it right a lot better than Glenn Beck or Greta Van Susteren or a lot of other people doing a lot of other shows have. I mean, like her or don't like her.
I don't like Glenn Beck.
Definitely better than Bill O'Reilly, that's for sure.
I don't like Glenn Beck either. But listen...
I can't stand Glenn Beck. Yeah. I mean, that was just... when he discussed the subject, I mean, that was just demeaning, and he didn't even make an attempt to like learn anything, you know.
Right, I saw the show.
Yeah, that was embarrassing.
My compliments on your site and on your show, and I wish you continued success with your show.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for taking my call.
Okay, very welcome. Scott, what's your thoughts as far as Congress looking at WWE? What do you think they're going to look for? How do you think they're going to react? I mean, like this, you know, one of the things with Congress and everything is that with baseball, I mean, baseball came in there. Baseball really didn't have much of a steroid policy, and then they came out with a steroid policy that was really weak. I mean, I remember reading it and going like, this is embarrassing. And Congress didn't let them get away with it.
They didn't, and I think it's also important to note that it's not like there are piles of dead baseball players stacked up like cordwood in the sport's recent history.
Yeah.
Wrestling has a situation that is flat-ass killing people.
Yeah, but big difference also is baseball is our national pastime, and, you know, whether we like it or not, there's far more people and probably far more politicians that will get upset when Barry Bonds breaks a record than the next 10 wrestlers who pass away.
Yeah,
and
I know
there's going to be people there's going to be people sitting there going that are going to be embarrassed that they're even discussing pro wrestling, even with multiple deaths to discuss.
Yeah, there's something to that, but I don't think that's much of a factor anymore. That was a factor in whether Congress will do anything. Now that we know Congress is going to do something, I don't think wrestling's place compared to baseball is anything more than a negligible factor, because the fact is they have asked for records, which means somebody up there is interested in it. And once they get to that point, if they were in the first place worried about the embarrassment of having to deal with wrestling at all, you know that once they start talking about this stuff, there's not one congressman there who is going to think anything besides, okay, there's no way I'm going to let myself be outdone by Vince McMahon on national television, which is what congressional hearings end up being on.
You know, the one thing that wrestling doesn't have going for it is the fact that it doesn't really have a strong political lobby backing it, and it's not. You know what I'm saying? It's like Major League Baseball is a huge part of communities, and you know, like there was a time, you know, when with Paul Bosch, Sam Mushnick, and some of the more, you know, the more well-connected promoters in the history of the business, where within their local fiefdom, they had those kind of connections like a lot of the baseball owners have. But Vince McMahon, by not really having a home base, even New York, it's not really a home base, and not having that kind of political connections, and also not having a very positive, I guess, public viewpoint. You know, it was like in Houston where you grew up, Scott. You know, Paul Bosch was a wrestling promoter, but he was not thought of as a bad guy or a dishonest guy or a sleazy guy, whereas Vince will not catch a break on that subject.
Well, yeah, and a lot of that's because of the way they acted in public. You know, Paul Bosch was a very gracious individual who was a big part of the Boys Town and the Lions Club and Kiwanis and every kind of local charity effort that there was. And when he talked, he was very modest about himself and always very gracious about the people in the community that he always said supported him. Contrast that with the way Vince McMahon reacts to the media. You can't tell me that there's any interview or circumstance where you could have rightly pictured Paul Bosch slapping interview questions out of a television reporter's hand.
No, even if he wanted to, he would not do it.
A lot of
he might change the finish of a main event.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they did have a case in '86 where our Houston Chronicle columnist, at the time Houston Post columnist, Ken Hoffman, wrote that since Jake Roberts was going to WWF, that there was no way he was going to beat Dick Slater for the North American title, and sure enough, Jake won the belt that night. But yeah, that was as confrontational as Bosch was going to get in the media, and that actually had more to do with Watts than Bosch.
Yeah. Well, you know, the funniest part of that story is that when he did that, and Bosch obviously, you know, was real upset about it, Bosch's reaction was to invite the guy over for some barbecued steaks.
Exactly.
You know, and I mean, you know, and this was a guy, he, you know, legitimately, I know from talking to Bosch during that period, he was, you know, he wasn't happy with Ken Hoffman, so his way of being unhappy was to invite him over and being nice to him, which is,
yep.
You know.
He tried to ingratiate him and answer within his working world any type of question that he could answer him, trying to get some contentment there. You know, whereas McMahon's policy and the way that he's handled his dealings with mass mainstream media has been to be nothing but confrontational, to be as controlling as you can, and not to give any ground or have any kind of real discussion or two-way about it, which is, you know, reporters notice that kind of stuff, and they will hold it against you when you have a problem. And now, unfortunately, McMahon has a problem. He's not going to get any benefit of the doubt from anybody, and his public perception problem that he has created himself is only going to get worse.
And Brian, I want to ask you this one. Do you think the WWE has, let's just say, because eventually, at some point, there will be another crisis. It's just inevitable in wrestling. You know, as any business. You know, the NBA is having a crisis too. You know, baseball's having a minor crisis. I don't know, crisis might be too strong of a word, but these things are going to happen. Do you think 5 years from now, 6 months from now, whenever the next crisis is, that WWE has learned anything from this one?
No.
Oh, that's cool. What do you think, Scott?
I think that's probably true. Their history has shown that regardless of what the consequences of treating the media ineptly and confrontationally, they always do it again the next time.
I do think that if it's 6 months from now, especially if this really drags on, they may not be as stupid as they've been, but absolutely 5 years from now, they'll probably be even dumber. Because this will be just another thing that they could have learned something from, and they will not have, which to me makes them far stupider.
Yeah, and you know what they will likely draw out of it if they come through it in anything resembling unscathed fashion is, well, we survived that one, acting any way we wanted to.
Actually, in some ways, you know, when you look back at a lot of the historical stuff, it's funny how it goes down, because in the end, they survived and at some point even came back from all prior crises. But the one thing also is that in all of those cases, I mean, whether it was, you know, I mean, people will look at, like, you know, the different things that they went through in the different years. Every one of them hurt them really bad at the time, and had some lingering problems that led to the next one in some ways, or certainly not learning anything until the next one. So, I mean, if you look from the Persian Gulf thing, you know, which in a roundabout way cost them NBC, which was gigantic, and cost them, you know, the record that they probably weren't going to get anyway in Los Angeles, the Coliseum. Then you had the Zahorian trial, and the way they handled that. Then you had the McMahon trial, and those things, you know, I mean, that led to the dark ages and the weakest period in the history of the company, but they did survive. And then you had this thing, and they were not about to go out of business. The company's wildly profitable, and you know, even if ratings don't bounce back so quick, and you know, the ratings are still, you know, I mean Bonnie Hammer's not happy, Vince McMahon's not happy at the same time. You know, you look at the top 10 cable shows, maybe they're not number 1 and number 2, but both hours are still in the top 10. So it's not like, you know, they've been destroyed, but at the same time, they've played it all wrong.
Right, and that's true, but, you know, like, the last time that they had a couple of things go their way, you know, for one thing, their major competition was run by inept management in 93, 94, 95, 96. And the other thing that they had was the transcendent personality. I mean, when I remember watching that King of the Ring in '96, and when Austin gives the 316 line, I sat there knowing I was watching something special, because that was the birth of a transcendent character. But I think that they've got a creative structure that prohibits other transcendent characters from coming up. They script the promos so thoroughly that the only people getting rewarded anymore are the people who are good memorizers.
If unless you're already there.
Right. But,
but you're right.
Austin in '96, he wasn't already there. He was a mid-carder.
Yeah. As far as a guy, it's very difficult to go from mid-card to the top. Even if you're good enough in the ring, and even if the crowd takes you there, there's almost a resistance, and really the only way you get there is either them deciding you're going to be the guy who gets there, or so many injuries where you're just kind of by process of elimination, you're there because everyone on top of you got hurt.
Right, but I mean, whenever we talk about crime prevention, one of our top law enforcement officials out here always says the same thing. I'd love to be able to tell you about how this program that I'm running is doing, but it's hard to measure what doesn't happen. And by the same token, who knows how many potential Stone Cold Steve Austins have been snuffed out by being told to go read the scripted interview instead of whatever they had in mind or whatever they could have come up with off the top of their head, because no one wrote Austin 316 for Austin. And it's moments like that that help somebody break out and get to that next level. And it's almost like they've set a structure in place to prevent that from happening.
Yeah. It's weakened the business in a lot of ways, too. I think it's weakened a lot of the charm of the business. I mean, I hate, in some ways, when people say that, like, it used to be better, but as time goes on, I'm beginning to feel that, there's good points about this era as compared to prior eras, but overall, boy, it's getting harder and harder to not argue that point in the sense of, when people say it used to be better. It used to be more. There were a lot of aspects where it did used to be better, and obviously the promos is the one where, when Dusty Rhodes came out on in the last couple of weeks, and he was the best promo guy, except for maybe Cena, in the whole company, and he's 61 years old.
Yep,
that's a problem.
And what ironic music when talking about wrestling today.
Yeah, I know. Bryan Danielson's theme music, right?
Yeah.
Bryan Danielson is an awesome wrestler.
He is great.
I was just watching the Noah show, the last Noah Budokan Hall show. I mean, he was just not really, even in a focal match. He was a six-man in the middle of the show, but just watching everything he did, and, let alone, the match that he had on the pay-per-view, on the ROH pay-per-view, the guy is just awesome. So if you've never seen the tape of Bryan Danielson, you should check out Ring of Honor and get a tape of Bryan Danielson against Kenta, or Bryan Danielson against Nigel McGuinness, or matches like that, because there are many wrestlers and athletes affiliated with Dr. Phil Astin who, for whatever reason, names have not come out that at some point are likely to come out, I've got to think.
I did notice it was very interesting in the congressional letter where, or maybe, I don't know if it was that letter or where it was, but I read somewhere that they were requesting that they wanted stage names and real names. And I thought, wonder why that is.
Just in case.
Sure. I think there's a lot of guys that they don't have real names, and thus they can't link them to
some of these other investigations. Here's another thing about that story is, that the prosecutor in Albany, New York, is just so gung-ho on the steroid thing and has busted some key pharmacies. And the Signature Pharmacy thing, that case, I think that there's 11 wrestlers linked to that one, the only name of which has come out, I believe, is two names actually of the 11 have come out, and that's Benoit and Eddie Guerrero, only because they're both dead. And then there's a doctor who pled guilty this week to basically, she got paid to write prescriptions for people that she never even met.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of names from WWE affiliated with that, although those names have not come out.
And that's another major thing, because their policy from day one stated you can't get internet prescriptions.
Yet, there's guys who have gotten internet prescriptions.
Yes.
And yeah, that was real. That's right, and that was a real strong one. Is you have to go to your primary care doctor to get a prescription for any of these things. I mean, they were not just the steroids, but they were, the WWE was against it. And I mean, one of the things also with WWE, they can't stop everything, but I do believe strongly, as far as the painkiller use goes, that WWE is 100% sincere in wanting to, I can't say eliminate it, but eliminate overuse of it because it does them no good.
Oh, yeah.
On the steroids, I mean, it's a very debatable subject. It's like, what are their goals? I mean, their functioning goal, of course, would be to eliminate it, but did they really want to? I mean, it's like...
Well, I think I was trying to explain this, but it came out wrong, but I think, I mean, obviously they don't want anyone taking illegal drugs, but I'm sure that if they had their way, steroids wouldn't even be illegal. And
but you can say that about a lot of things, but that's not their way. I mean, and it hasn't been that case for 16 years now.
Sure. So I don't really want to say that they want guys to be on steroids because it's not exactly what I'm trying to say, but they want the results that steroids get basically, and
they want guys with great bodies to push in the main events, and
they're not that interested in how they get there.
They want to have plausible deniability that they can make a case for the fact that they don't know what they're doing, which is very difficult for Vince because Vince is a sophisticated guy. So he's looking for these tests to be his proof, and saying, look, we're testing, and these are the results. Perhaps knowing full well that they're not maybe testing enough, or maybe that I don't know what exactly. I mean,
another thing I was thinking about with this whole deal is they've got a great scapegoat in Dr. Aston. Because when we talk about internet prescription and that sort of thing, this is all stuff that was in the policy, and that was Dr. Black's responsibility. He was the guy that should have been looking at a guy with a 59-to-1 ratio and going, hold on a second, why is this allowed? He's the guy that should have been looking at a guy that lives in California and was getting stuff from a doctor in Georgia and said, hey, why am I allowing this? He's the guy, I mean, there are a million questions. Why didn't he say, okay, hold on, you're getting this through the internet, that's not allowed.
Now, in the case of the guy from California getting it from the doctor in Georgia, that was before Dr. Black was involved.
Okay, sure. But then there may be, I mean, if Aston was getting stuff for other guys, there are probably others, but we don't know for sure. But
the thing is what I do know WWE never wanted and hasn't wanted for a decade is multiple guys going to the same doctor. Now, that could be either for the fact that they know that when multiple guys go to the same doctor, that the doctor's a mark and it's not really, medicine, or the fact that if something happens with one guy, it's only one guy as opposed to a Dr. Aston, or, had something like this happened with Hackett at the wrong time when everybody in both companies, and then that's an exaggeration, but when many main guys in both companies were getting stuff from Hackett, it's like you don't want that, because that is the one thing they learned from the Zahorian trial is that when, 36 of your guys are all going to the same doctor, all of a sudden you're linked pretty strong with that story.
Yeah, no, I don't want to hold WWE blameless or blame Dr. Black for everything. But I do think that there are a number of things that he should have been doing that clearly he was not doing.
Yeah. And there's things that they could be doing, and including, when I look at the number of tests, okay, their policy says no less than 4 tests a year, okay? Now the policy had been going on between the start of the policy and when Chris died a couple of weeks ago. That was a 17-month period. Now, Chris had been tested 4 times. So that's a lot less than 4 a year. I mean, theoretically,
they didn't count the time when he was off.
Okay.
When he had the long period where he took time off.
He was off for the summer.
Yeah.
Okay. So okay. Counting that, then it's probably right at 4 a year.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that actually makes sense. All right. We're going to go to Derek in Michigan. Derek, what's going on? Derek, are you there? In Detroit. Cromley in Ohio, are you there?
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing good. What's going on?
Not too much. I just had a question about the Bound for Glory. I guess that this show's going to be in a 13,000-seat arena, and I went to the last Bound for Glory in Detroit. I'm one of the few hardcore, diehard, I guess, at 25,000 every month. And I'm kind of worried about this show. This could be a huge disaster, couldn't it?
Well, they're going to curtain off half the building. I think that's already set up. I mean, the problem is, when they went to Nashville for the last one, it looked good on television, and they only had, I forget what the number was, but it wasn't a good number. They were very disappointed in Nashville. And I don't think that they will go to Atlanta and draw any less than Nashville. There's problems in going to Atlanta, which is the PR aspect of it. They got all kinds of nice PR in Nashville because it's Jeff's hometown and because Frank Wychick was involved. And it's going to be very difficult to get that same type of stuff in Atlanta. And there's a lot of people in the company that were, a lot of people in the company were not fond of the Atlanta move, but they got a great deal on the building, and Atlanta is a traditionally good wrestling city, so that's why they made the move.
Is it possible that they could try to bring in Goldberg for this one shot, just try to sell this building out in pub for his hometown?
I mean, yeah, they could if they wanted to pay what Goldberg wants, but I don't expect it to happen because Goldberg wants more than they're willing to pay, and I think mentally Goldberg has finally reached the point where before I think Goldberg's mind was, I might come back at some point. I think now at this point, I think he considers himself a retired athlete and a father, and, Bill doesn't need to be, he's really weird when it comes to wrestling, okay? Because in wrestling, almost everybody in wrestling, they have this need to be somebody, and they have this need to be, in public and all this. And because of that, as long as they can physically go, they keep coming back. And then long after they can physically go, they still want to keep coming back. And Bill has his money. I don't think that Bill's ever going to have a money issue. He's got a young kid at home. He doesn't have any real pressures in life, and I don't think he wants to go back to wrestling. And I think he doesn't want to go to TNA because, his only reason for wanting to go to TNA, I mean, he's said this many times, is if TNA is going to go out there, challenge Vince, and beat Vince, he has enough dislike for Vince that he would like to be on the team that beats Vince. But if they're not going to be in that position where they're going to beat Vince, then he has no motive that's going to get him going. And if he's not motivated, I don't know. I just don't see it happening. But yeah, it's possible. And quite frankly, it's a pretty darn good idea for Bill Goldberg in Atlanta, bring him back, and, but I don't think it's going to happen. We're going to go to Adam in Long Island. Adam, what's going on?
Hi, Dave.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Pretty good.
Okay, I heard something about Samoa Joe being booked for Pro Wrestling Noah in October.
Yeah, I heard. I'd known for a while that he was going to go. I didn't know when, and then I just heard in the last couple of days it's coming up pretty soon.
I was just wondering if it was true because I haven't heard about TNA, any guys from TNA going to Noah. But are they allowed to do that?
TNA is working with New Japan, IGF, Noah, and they might even be 0-1 as well. It's not like the old days where you would only work exclusively with one group. I mean, the Japanese are not dealing from that kind of strength, and every group. No, All Japan would have been the other group because they're sending Steiner to All Japan on August 26th. So yeah, they're basically working with everyone. So okay, it's not that's what's going on. Yeah.
And is TNA contract running out in 3 months? Or so, I heard, or
with Joe.
Hmm.
It might be. He came in.
I just heard fall.
The fall? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah. This is a big match coming up, and that'll be.
If I was him, he's the one guy. I wouldn't go to WWE.
Yeah.
I think that's he'd probably, again, he'd probably make more money. He'd probably be miserable because once you've had a taste of stardom, to then be denigrated and used as a prelim guy, it doesn't feel good. And his contract that he'll be offered with TNA is good amount of money. I mean, it's not great amount of money, but it's probably good. At the same time, I could see some frustration if I was him. He's worked really, really hard, and, the one thing with Joe, and I don't know, I have not spoken to him once about any of this. I'm just thinking if it was me and, I hurt my knee at that TV and then I paid my own medical bill, I wouldn't have a lot of loyalty to TNA. That's the one thing from TNA that, they're going to have to change that because if that stuff, comes before Congress, they, like Jeff, can go in there and just go because he's the son of Jerry Jarrett, and this is how the business was, and it is how the business was. But in 2007, the idea that someone goes out there and blows out his knee in a match on your show, and then he's paying for the medical bill himself, I just don't think that flies with most human beings that look at it from the outside. And
that's actually one thing McMahon in particular right now better be hoping doesn't come up before Congress is the question of independent contractors versus employees. Because if that does come out, then
with Sanjay Dutt, right?
What was that, Sanjay Dutt?
He had the MRI, and now he's upset too, right? So that's a big problem.
Yeah, I think I can't imagine. TNA actually is in an interesting position because Dixie Carter, her she's got the directive from above that you've got to cut these losses down as much as possible, and she wants to keep this thing going. Because they are on the brink. It looks like there's a good chance they're getting 2 hours. Real good chance. I don't know exactly where they are profit-loss wise, but, like they open up some international territories, maybe get pay-per-view internationally, and if they can increase their buys, 20, 30%. There's, get some extra TV money. They're certainly in this position where they can be profitable. And they certainly don't want, Bob Carter just go like, look, that I'm losing too much money, especially now, to pull out because there's light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. But at the same time, they got to do something because, and all the things that we're talking about, whether it be paying for medical or drug testing, those are added costs. And at the same time, right now, it may be something that's a cost of business that you can't do without, just like, you've got to spend money on your TV. Or else the TV looks too dingy and it doesn't work doesn't work as far as getting ratings. So, it's going to be real. TNA's got to make a move, and we'll see what that move is.
As far as Congress and the medical thing with TNA, I mean, we have talked about this a million times, but the real world looking at this business is going to be far more than just these medical issues. I mean, this business looked at. I mean, how many times have you talked to somebody in the real world and tried to explain something that happened in wrestling, and it's unfathomable to these people?
You just get this look of horror.
Well, I mean, just the idea that these guys are paying for their own hotels when they go on the road.
Sure.
And I mean that happens in both companies. I mean, when Stacy Keibler was on Dancing with the Stars, and she was with those quote real stars, and she was talking to them about her life in WWE, and I mean it was just her life in WWE. She had never really done anything else, so that was her life. It was when she was talking to those people and they were explaining, like they were appalled that this girl was driving, 5 hours to gigs and paying for her own hotels and paying for her own rental cars.
Her own rental car.
Yeah, I mean it's like they're just they're just going like what is this business that you're in and probably taking pain pills because she's always hurt and looking at her going like. You are you don't need to be in something where you're hurting yourself. I mean, you're good looking. You know what I mean? You've got a future, and, I mean, as soon as she was around, like, real people and real actors, I mean, look how quick she got out of this game.
Yep.
Anything else?
No, thank you very much. Have a good night.
Okay, you too. All right, let's go to Bill in Arizona. Bill, what's going on?
Hey, what's up, guys? It's actually Phil.
Bill,
and,
okay. Sorry.
Dude, Samoa Joe's definitely got to go to WWE to get to the next level. TNA doesn't make stars. WWE makes stars. I think if he's got any chance.
But WWE has a very narrow view. They have a very narrow view of what a star is, and he doesn't fit into that view.
That's true.
And they've got a mad Samoan right now.
They've got their quota of Samoans, and the other thing is that not only do they have their quota of Samoans, but they have a whole family that they're loyal to. And he's not part of that family. Not that that's going to kill him. I mean, like if
he's not part of the family.
No, the NOI family. I mean, they got Afa, and I mean, it's like they've got that whole family worth of guys. I mean, every Samoan practice that's ever come in is somehow or other related to that family.
Well, that's why I figured he'd be part of the family.
Well, he's not part of the family, though.
Okay.
Not.
I mean, the whole gone in a year and a half ago, he would have been Umaga.
He wouldn't have been Umaga because he's only 280, and he's not tall enough to be and big enough to, in Vince McMahon's mind, be a monster. And that then, if you're not a monster, you have to have a good physique, and he doesn't have a good physique. And they would go in there, and the first thing they're going to do is we got to give him a bodysuit to cover his physique, and then you're starting to get typecast, and then you're going to have guys saying he doesn't know how to work. You know, whether he does or not is immaterial. That's what guys are going to say, and it's going to be. I think. Eventually, I mean, Cream does rise to the top, and he may still survive it, you know, a year or two down the road, or if people get behind him, kind of like, you know, Punk was made to eat it for a while, but to a degree because the people reacted to Punk and Process of Elimination where there's nobody else in ECW, Punk ended up as a sort of, I don't like to call him a main eventer. He's a main eventer on the ECW TV show, but he's not going to main event any shows. But
he definitely persevered, you know, over
and he had to persevere. You know, he definitely had a lot of strikes against him coming in. I mean, some that were kind of unfair, you know, and some that maybe weren't as unfair.
Yeah, I hear you. Hey, and I think Khali takes a lot of flack, but I think compared to early Big Show or even Andre the Giant, I don't think he looks that bad.
I don't know about that.
I
was just watching last night that stuff with Dave, and the spear looked good. Friday night, but I mean up until he's horrendously bad. I mean,
I was watching 24/7, and there was a match with Andre, and you know, he was much better than Great Khali.
Okay, now, what year are you watching Andre?
This would have been about 77. This wasn't the old Andre.
Okay, because when Andre was really old, but see, Andre had already made his name. When Andre was really old, Andre knew what to do. Andre was a great mental worker. He just physically was so broken down he couldn't do anything.
Obviously, but I think physically Khali's in a better place than I ever saw Andre in.
Oh, you know I wouldn't say that. I mean, physically, if you're looking at him from a physique standpoint, oh, absolutely. Andre was never close to as tall. Andre never had a physique like Khali.
Yeah.
But even, you know, as I saw Andre, well, you know, nobody saw Andre really early on because he wrestled so many years in Europe that before he was ever, quote, discovered. Right. So I don't know how bad he was at the start, but I know when I first started seeing him, he was a million times better than Khali. And Big Show, I mean, I saw Big Show's first match was the match with Hogan, right?
Yep.
In Detroit. Well, he's better than Khali will ever be. You know, I mean, physique-wise, no. You know, he didn't have the body. He didn't. You know, he was not a former bodybuilder like Khali was.
Right, but I just heard on the WWE schedule, guys get better so much faster. I mean, Khali's bound to improve, isn't he? You know what I mean?
Theoretically,
he's improved.
Theoretically,
that doesn't mean he's any good.
I saw him on TV a year ago, I'm sure.
Yeah, you know what, though? He's still pretty, you know, it's like, I thought when I watched the Cena matches that Khali had improved. But, and I finally realized that
Cena was
It's
carrying.
weird. When I saw him against Batista, I realized he probably hasn't improved, and it's just that Cena is,
It was Cena who had improved.
Yeah, Cena
I watched Cena this last Monday, and I'm not sure Cena improved either. I don't know what it is. I think Cena when John Cena's in a main event, John Cena works super hard. Okay, so I give him that.
Right.
And when John Cena's in a main event that the agents work out every single spot in, I think that John Cena is pretty damn good because he can do it. But when you're in a TV match or a house show match against the wrong guy. You know, I mean, like with Umaga and with Caden Murdoch on Monday. I mean, I was watching Cena, and I was like, you know, my reaction was, oh my God, like did the clock strike 12 and he turned into a frog? You know what I mean?
I think I read that.
He was horrible, and I was shocked because he'd been so good almost all year.
Right, because the Rumble match with Umaga was a really good main event. I mean, I'm sure that was.
But every pay-per-view main event he's been is awesome. I mean, the Lashley match, which I didn't expect to be that good, that was an excellent match too.
Yeah, I thought it was really good.
Yeah, but there's every now and then there's these nights. You know, I saw him with the house shows with Edge, and I mean, you know, the guy every match it's always good. But again, it's like they wrestle each other 100 times that year, and Edge is awesome. So. Yeah, I think when he's comfortable and it's with people that he's worked with or people that the match has been, you know, carefully laid out, I think that John Cena is really, really good. But I think that when you just give him a new opponent that he's not comfortable with and not a lot of direction, he transforms himself. I mean, he's much better than he was, but you can see
he can
kind of
follow
the
instructions
clumsiness and
where he can have a good
unsurety
match,
and stuff.
But
Well,
he's
the
not what
upside-
anybody was going to call a ring general.
Right. The upside is that he's still young, though. You know what I mean? He's still got a long way to go. I mean, he's not. I'd say he's not a good worker, but he works hard. You know what I
He
mean?
works super hard. I wouldn't even say he's not a good worker. I would just say that there are aspects of his stuff that aren't good yet. But he's had too many great matches for me to say, oh, he's not a good worker, and they're not all with edge. You know what I mean? It's like let's face it. He had pretty decent matches with Khali, and that's a hard guy to have a good match with. So John Cena, he ain't bad, that's for sure. Brian, what do you think?
Yep.
Triple H coming up, should be back SummerSlam, if not TV before SummerSlam. Big or small or in between?
As far as physically?
Yeah.
I would say in between.
What do you think, Scott?
I bet he comes back looking more Luger-like than ever.
I know that the magazines are done well in advance, but the new WWE magazine, he's the guest editor, and they've got a picture in there of Lashley at 177 pounds doing wrestling, and his caption is, "My God, somebody threw Bobby in the dryer."
Oh, boy. Well, of course,
bad timing.
That magazine was done right at the wrong time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But, was that his caption?
That was his caption.
Oh, well, what are you going to do? I mean, you saw what he said to Chris Masters.
Oh, yeah. So I would have said huge, except all of this went down, and I can't imagine him being that stupid. So I'll just say in the middle.
Yeah, I think so, too. I can't imagine, especially him, because he's going to be a lightning rod.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, if he comes back huge, people are just going to throw their hands in the air and just go, you guys don't get it, and I don't think that's the reaction that they want right now. Anyway, we are totally out of time. I want to thank all you guys. Thanks, Scott, for joining us. Brian, of course, thanks. And I guess Brian will most likely be on Nancy Grace, if not Monday, at some point during the week. When
I would presume soon, but you never know.
You never know. And anyway, and of course, we will be back here this coming Sunday. So until then, you're listening to Wrestling Observer Live on the Sports Byline Broadcasting Network.